This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're exploring a really interesting idea. Can reading be, well, more than just a pastime? We're diving into bibliotherapy, thinking of it as a way to use books, stories, even poetry as a tool for personal growth and maybe a way to feel better.
Yeah, it's about that process, isn't it? Reading something, really letting it sink in, maybe talking about it.
Right, and seeing if it can maybe shift how you look at things.
Exactly. And what's fascinating, I think, is how it's being looked at as a non-medical way to support our mental well-being.
Yeah, and that feels so relevant right now.
Absolutely. I mean, the need for mental health support seems to have really grown, especially thinking about things like the pandemic.
Definitely.
Healthcare workers, for instance, they were under enormous strain, lots of struggles with, sleep, feeling down, anxiety, burnout, the list goes on.
Right, and that's where something like bibliotherapy might offer a really accessible and often, more affordable option for boosting how we're feeling.
It could be really helpful, especially maybe for people who feel a bit hesitant about seeking traditional therapy routes.
Okay, so that's our goal today then. We want to really dig into how effective bibliotherapy actually is for enhancing mental health, our well-being, and we'll be looking at some pretty interesting research that gets into what it is, the techniques, and, well, does it actually work?
Yeah, and our exploration today, it pulls from a pretty comprehensive systematic review, which looked at a whole bunch of studies.
Okay.
And also some articles that really explore the nuts and bolts, the practical side of how bibliotherapy is used.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit then. Bibliotherapy. It sounds like it's more involved than just, grabbing a novel when you're feeling a bit low. What are we really talking about here?
You're right. It's definitely more structured. Yes, it involves reading material, and that could happen in a session or, on your own time.
Okay.
But there are key pieces. There has to be a specific goal, right? A therapeutic aim. And the whole idea is personal improvement, helping someone grow.
So it's not quite the same as me just wandering into the self-help aisle.
Not exactly, no. A big difference is often that structured setting for reflection and discussion.
Ah, okay.
Frequently with the therapist involved, guiding that process. And the reading material itself is usually, curated, picked carefully, almost like a prescription, tailored to what someone's grappling with.
Right, like a reading prescription.
Kind of, yeah. And a key insight here is really empowering people to actively work on their challenges between sessions. It builds that sense of agency.
That makes sense. And it's not just for one-on-one therapy, is it? I imagine it could work in groups, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's very flexible, great in individual therapy, but also really effective in group settings.
How so?
Well, think about younger people using stories can be such a powerful way to connect. And in group therapy, if everyone reads the same thing and discusses it,
Yeah.
that shared experience can spark really valuable feedback, deeper connections, and just that feeling that, okay, other people get this too. A sense of community.
Okay, so it sounds like there are different ways to use books therapeutically. Does that mean there are different types of bibliotherapy, different approaches?
Yes, that's right. There are several ways it's categorized. You've got creative bibliotherapy that often means groups discussing fiction or poetry, exploring themes. Then there's developmental bibliotherapy, often used in schools, helping kids navigate things like puberty or bullying.
Right.
Prescriptive bibliotherapy often uses those self-help type books, aiming to modify thoughts or behaviors. That can be guided or done solo. And then there's therapeutic bibliotherapy, which is often used with other established therapies, kind of like a supplement.
And when you say a counselor prescribes a book, what does that look like in practice? How does that work?
Well, the main technique is the counselor recommends specific reading that really connects with the client's difficulties. Usually the reading happens outside the session.
Okay.
And the thinking is when you encounter similar situations or characters in a story, it can really build empathy. You see, okay, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, that feeling of not being alone.
Exactly. And it can spark new insights, give you language for things, become a launch pad for conversations back in therapy. Seeing your own challenges in a narrative can just offer a completely fresh perspective.
It was like a three-way interaction, as one of our sources mentioned. The book, the counselor, and the client.
Precisely.
It's about clicking with a character and then talking about how their journey, their solutions, might apply to your own life.
Spot on. The insight there is that stories aren't just passive entertainment. They become this safe space to explore our own, internal worlds.
Okay, so what kinds of things can bibliotherapy actually help people with? It sounds pretty versatile.
It really is quite broad. Based on the research, we're talking common issues like anxiety, depression, but also more specific things like eating disorders. It's even used for what are sometimes called existential concerns, loneliness, finding meaning, grappling with freedom, death.
Wow, big topics.
Big topics, yeah. But also relationship issues, substance use, anger management, even things like shyness or socially awkward behavior. And it can offer support for grief, dealing with rejection, and even understanding the impact of negativisms, racism, sexism, things like that.
That's a really wide range.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier specific examples like workbooks for anxiety or maybe novels dealing with grief.
Yeah.
It just shows how adaptable it is.
It really does. The key is finding the right material for that specific person and their needs.
So, okay, beyond tackling specific problems, what are some of the more general benefits? How does it help overall?
Well, a huge one is gaining personal insight, really understanding yourself better.
So?
Through engaging with the reading, people can develop new coping strategies, boost their problem-solving skills, and just get a clearer picture of themselves and their challenges. It builds self-awareness.
And it extends beyond the therapy room, right? It's not just happening in that hour.
That's a crucial point. Bibliotherapy allows for that homework aspect, the reading between sessions.
Right.
This can really deepen the meaning of the therapy itself and help solidify the learning. It can also act as a kind of prevention tool, equipping people with ways to cope with future life challenges.
And there's also that perspective piece, isn't there? Seeing how characters or real people in nonfiction handle similar struggles must be quite powerful.
Hugely powerful. Connecting emotionally with characters, seeing how they navigate difficulties. It normalizes the whole experience of struggling and seeking help. Especially if the therapist picks material where characters are also, working through their own stuff, it makes it feel less isolating.
Okay, so we get a good handle on what bibliotherapy is, what it might help with. But the big question, how effective is it? What does the actual research say? Let's get into those findings.
Yeah, the research is actually quite encouraging on several fronts. Let's start with depression.
Okay.
A big systematic review from 2017 found it can be really effective for adults with mild depression and not just short term. The benefits lasted, with decreased symptoms seen anywhere from 3 months up to 3 years later.
Wow, up to 3 years. That's significant.
It is. And another major review, a meta-analysis, showed that for depression, the positive effects of bibliotherapy were medium to large. And interestingly, quite comparable to what you'd expect from traditional psychotherapy, like talk therapy.
Comparable to talk therapy.
Yeah. So when researchers talk about medium to large effect sizes, that's code for saying it's making a real measurable difference. It's not just a tiny effect.
That's really impressive for something seemingly simple like reading. What about other areas?
Well, for eating disorders, there was a survey in 2018 suggesting that self-help bibliotherapy seemed more effective than reading fiction about eating disorders. Some people actually found the fiction unhelpful in that case.
Interesting distinction. And for kids?
For child behavior, yes.
Yeah.
Creative bibliotherapy showed positive effects for internalizing issues like anxiety or sadness, but also for externalizing things like aggression, and even for boosting pro-social behaviors, being helpful, being kind.
And what about anxiety and stress? That affects so many people.
Absolutely. A 2017 study on college students found that using mindfulness-based bibliotherapy led to significant decreases in anxiety, stress, perceived stress, and even anxiety sensitivity. Plus, it boosted their quality of life.
Mindfulness-based bibliotherapy.
Yeah.
So combining reading with mindfulness practices.
Exactly. And a more recent meta-analysis in 2021 also pointed to its potential as a really beneficial non-pharmacological tool for anxiety and stress.
So it seems to hold up pretty well across different conditions.
It does seem that way. Those larger meta-analyses consistently suggest its efficacy can be comparable to psychotherapy for many common disorders, particularly depression. There was even one study that found something quite interesting.
Yeah.
Participants who initially did better with psychotherapy actually continued to improve when they later used bibliotherapy, eventually catching up to the psychotherapy group's long-term improvement levels.
So it has staying power.
It seems so. And, thinking about the current state of mental health care,
Yeah.
with potential shortages of professionals, insurance hurdles, Bibliotherapy does offer some practical advantages.
Like efficiency.
Accessibility. Exactly. Its potential to increase efficiency in delivering mental health care is definitely something researchers are noting. And the fact that patients can often be involved in choosing the reading material that fosters autonomy and investment in their own care, which is usually a good thing.
Of course, it's probably not a magic bullet.
Mm.
Like any approach, there must be things to keep in mind, right? Some considerations.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. First and foremost, the person has to be willing to read and also willing to share thoughts and feelings about it, potentially.
Makes sense.
And it's generally not the first recommendation for someone experiencing psychosis where reality testing is significantly impaired, or for individuals with maybe limited intellectual ability or a very short attention span that makes sustained reading difficult.
And people who just plain don't like reading.
Right. Or people who just really dislike reading. It's probably not going to be a good fit then.
And the choice of book itself must be critical. You can't just hand someone anything.
Absolutely crucial. Tailoring is key. You need to consider the person's specific needs, their preferences, fiction, nonfiction, workbooks, and definitely their reading level. It has to be accessible.
Right. You don't want it to be another source of stress.
Exactly. And it's also really important to steer clear of material that might be, propaganda or contain misleading or harmful information. Careful curation is essential.
Okay. Now, our research also touched on healthcare workers specifically. Given the immense pressure they've faced, what did the sources say there?
Well, interestingly, the main systematic review we looked at didn't actually find many studies focused directly on bibliotherapy for healthcare workers.
Oh, really? That's surprising.
It is a bit. But given the high levels of stress, anxiety, depression we know they experience, especially during the pandemic, the potential for bibliotherapy seems really high, particularly when you think about the logistical challenges of getting them standard treatments in those high-pressure situations.
So it could be a really viable option, even if the direct research is still catching up.
That's the thinking. And while direct research is limited, we can sort of extrapolate. Maybe stories focusing on resilience or empathy or finding meaning could be particularly potent for them.
But you mentioned there were some related studies in that review.
Yes, there were 3 studies in what they called the recovery round that touched on healthcare contexts. One looked at how personal stories impacted nursing students. Another explored using imaginative literature in nursing scholarship. And a third looked at how graphic stories, like graphic novels, could build empathy between physicians and patients. So while not all strictly traditional bibliotherapy,
They all point towards the power of narrative and stories in that field.
exactly, they all suggested that engaging with stories in various forms seems to have a positive impact for people in healthcare roles.
It's amazing how powerful that connection with a story can be.
Mm.
The research also mentioned something about bibliotherapy and our values. How does that connection work?
Yeah, that was an interesting finding. Bibliotherapy can apparently lead to what the researchers called a signification of activities, like seeing things through a new moral lens because of what you've read.
A new moral lens.
Yeah, interesting.
And certain values seemed linked to positive results. Autonomy, that sense of being in control, and justice or fairness were closely linked. Liberty and proactiveness also showed an impact.
Can you give an example of how reading might reshape that moral lens?
Sure. Imagine reading a novel where a character makes a really difficult but courageous choice to stand up for something they believe is right.
Okay.
Reading that might make you reflect differently on situations in your own life where maybe you haven't been as assertive or brave as you'd like. It's like the story provides a new framework, a new perspective for thinking about your own values and action.
Ah, I see. And how are those specific values like autonomy and justice actually encouraged through this process? Well, autonomy often gets a boost through that self-help aspect we talked about. Gaining knowledge, developing problem-solving skills from the reading. That's empowering. It helps people feel more proactive in their own treatment.
Right, taking an active role.
Exactly. And justice connects in a couple of ways. One is increased access bibliotherapy can reach people who are geographically isolated or perhaps can't afford regular therapy. It can also be used with larger groups when personnel are limited.
So it makes help more available.
Right. And it also offers a more private way for people to address potentially sensitive issues, which ties into fairness and respect for privacy.
Okay, so we've explored the what and the why.
Yeah.
But how does it actually work on that deeper level? Our sources mentioned understanding it through hermeneutic analysis. That sounds complex. Can you break that down?
It sounds more complex than it is, really. Think of hermeneutic analysis simply as the study of interpretation, how we find meaning in texts. In the context of bibliotherapy, it helps us understand a kind of three-stage process that often happens when someone engages deeply with a story for therapeutic reasons.
These stages.
Yeah. First is identification. The reader connects with the character, sees something of themselves, forms a bond. Second is catharsis. As the character experiences conflict, struggles, emotions, the reader experiences that vicariously, releases some of their own pent-up feelings.
Like an emotional release through the character.
Exactly. And the third stage is insight. After going through that identification and catharsis, the reader reflects on their own situation, their own life, and might start to internalize new ways of thinking or behaving inspired by the story.
So literature becomes almost like a mirror.
A mirror, yeah, or maybe a simulation space. It reflects aspects of human existence, emotions, values, conflicts, and prompts us to reflect on our own. It's not just reading, it's an active engagement that can lead to self-discovery.
It sounds like it can really help people understand themselves on a different level.
Precisely. Reading can help unpack our own moral objectives, our values, how we rank them, potentially leading to a broader moral horizon, as one source put it. And interestingly, going back to effectiveness, one study even found that patients with psychosis showed improvements in clinical symptoms and their cognitive and social functioning after participating in reading groups.
That is quite remarkable. Okay, so let's get practical. For a therapist interested in using this, or even someone thinking about trying it informally, what are some good strategies for actually implementing bibliotherapy?
Right. Good question. There are several practical things. Starting with a personal meeting is usually best. Building that rapport, understanding needs.
Yeah.
Then maybe incorporating weekly, short follow-ups calls, emails just to check in, provide encouragement.
Keep the momentum going.
Exactly. And it's really helpful to explicitly link the reading material back to the psychotherapeutic goals. Use it to reinforce what's being discussed in sessions. And as we said, tailoring that reading level is absolutely crucial for engagement.
What about actually getting the books? That could be a barrier.
It can be. So maybe having a small lending library in the clinic, or even collaborating with local librarians. Many are very interested in the therapeutic potential of reading.
That's a great idea.
And for groups, encouraging actual book clubs or using the readings as discussion prompts in group therapy can really foster that social connection and shared learning.
And are there ways to integrate it more directly with specific mental health work?
Oh, definitely. For instance, a therapist might actually go through the diagnostic criteria for something like depression, maybe using the DSM-5-TR with the patient, using clear language. This builds understanding and trust.
Okay.
It's also useful to recognize that patients might start using metaphors or characters from their reading to talk about difficult things. It can feel safer sometimes.
Oh, like a shared language.
Exactly. And while we've highlighted the strong results for depression, some meta-analyses show really impressive effect sizes, Cohen's D figures that are quite high. It's good to remember the benefits extend beyond that. Assertion skills, anxiety, sexual dysfunction, even reducing alcohol intake, improving caregiver well-being. There's research touching on all these areas.
And what about fiction versus nonfiction or workbooks? Does the type matter?
It depends on the goal and the person. While those CBT-based self-help workbooks are often studied and very effective, fiction shouldn't be underestimated. It offers rich, vicarious life experiences. You can gain huge psychodynamic insights through identifying with characters, exploring complex themes.
And what about different formats, like audiobooks?
Absolutely. Suggesting audiobooks is a great idea. People can listen while commuting, exercising. It makes it more accessible, maybe more enjoyable.
Good point.
And always ask about the patient's interests. What do they like to read? This supports their autonomy.
Right.
After they've read something, ask open-ended questions like, what really stood out to you? Or what are your key takeaways? And then give them time to actually think before they answer. Don't rush it.
Let the insights emerge.
Exactly. If it's fiction, asking, how is this character's situation similar to or different from your own life can be incredibly powerful for reflection. And one final tip, if the person is married or partnered.
Yeah.
Sometimes suggesting the spouse or partner reads the same book can be really beneficial. Creates a shared understanding and platform for conversation.
That's a fantastic idea. Wow, this has been such a thorough exploration. To kind of wrap things up, what are the main things you think we should take away from this deep dive into bibliotherapy research?
Well, I think the key points are that bibliotherapy is generally a cost-effective and pretty accessible tool. And importantly, it has demonstrated effectiveness for a range of mental health concerns, particularly depression.
Right, the evidence seems quite strong there.
And it also holds significant promise, even if more research is needed, for supporting groups like healthcare workers who face really unique pressures.
And it's clearly more than just reading. It's about that potential to gain really valuable personal insights, to develop empathy for ourselves and others, and just increase self-awareness through engaging with literature.
Exactly. But the caveat is always there. Like any approach, it's crucial to tailor it. Consider the individual's needs, their preferences, their reading ability, to make sure it's actually a helpful and positive experience.
Absolutely. And on that note, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. How might intentionally bringing more reading into your own life, even outside of any formal therapy, offer you new perspectives, new ways of seeing things, and support your own well-being? What kinds of stories or maybe what kind of information might be most beneficial for you to explore right now? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.